Welcome back to the corner. Part 2 of the Book of the New Sun reread. This is my least favorite of the Don Mates covers. It's a little too cartoonish, I think. This is the Bruce Pennington cover for Sword of the Lictor, with Severian and Dorcas pictured. It opens with a sort of status quo with Severian in a place that he's staying at, which is unusual. I could read a whole book about Severian as Lictor of Thrax. Of course, as soon as Gene Wolfe introduces us to the city and we start to get to know it, Severian goes instantly back to Conan mode, wandering the countryside. But before he does, it's like he's trying to make his life work, and he takes well to leadership as Lictor. He takes well to the job, and he has more trouble with domestic life. It's almost like a very 1950s relationship with him and Dorcas. And it starts out with her visiting the Vincula and being really shocked by seeing the prisoners and stuff. And she hates his job. That's probably what sort of spurs her crisis, where she begins to get her memories back. And when she's freaking out later and she cuts off her hair to get rid of the smell from the Vincula, at that point she's getting her memories back. But Severian still thinks that she's upset about his job. It's a terrific conversation where he goes over a long explanation of why imprisonment and torture is necessary in society. It's very well thought out, and you get the sense that he barely believes it himself. Severian goes to the costume ball to kill for the Archon. He's supposed to strangle Syriaca right there. And he comments on the sick society. He imagines if the new sun came right now, everyone would enter the new world in the costumes that they were dressed up as. Severian has often talked about society as a degenerate age. It's just an awesome scene. And when he talks to Syriaca, she tells about her moment of meeting some exultant or armiger who's higher than her. The best moment of her life, her moment of love and hope. And this disgraced professional murderer sees that. And of course he doesn't kill her. Instead, he returns to heal the boy and her sister with the claw. And Gene Wolfe uses a little bit of timeline shenanigans to delay the knowledge that he didn't kill Syriaca. He doesn't play his role in the degenerate society. Instead, he literally flushes himself through the toilet of the city and back into Conan mode. But there's a few really cool things before he goes. When he heals the boy and his sister with the claw, he says he realized he was no longer a torturer. And then the scene where the salamander attacks is great description of this nightmarish animal. This is when, the book gets kind of dark. Listen to this description. I have already said that from behind, when it opened itself towards the demarquee, it seemed a reptilian flower. That impression persisted now when we saw it in its full terror and glory, but it was joined by two others. The first was the sensation of intense and otherworldly heat. It seemed a reptile still, but a reptile that burned in a way never known on earth, as though some desert asp had dropped into a sphere of snow. The second was of raggedness, fluttering in a wind that was not of air. It seemed a blossom still, but it was a blossom whose petals of white and pale yellow and flame had been tattered by some monstrous tempest born in its own heart. In all these impressions, surrounding them and infusing them, was a horror that I cannot describe. It drew all resolution and strength from me, so that for a moment I could neither flee nor attack it. The creature and I seemed fixed in a matrix of time that had nothing to do with anything that had gone before or since, and that, since it held us, who were its only occupants, immobile, could be altered by nothing. It sounds like the salamander uses a little bit of the psionic powers from the Tournament of Psionic Murder series, available on Amazon.com. The way Dorcas's true story is revealed by spitting up the stones is really sad and touching. And their conversation that they have when she has to leave for Nessus and he has to go escape from the Autarch's guards is just really beautiful, because, they're like a young couple that has really fucked up in their relationship and in their world. I like the line on page 69. Severian said, "We had reversed our roles like lost children who comfort each other alternately." Severian heads for the mountains. He's looking for the Pellarines to return the claw, and he has a lot of time to philosophize and go with his thoughts. He gets into a lot of interesting stuff. One of my favorites: "I wondered as I descended if it might not be that Earth is not, as we assume, older than her daughters the trees, and imagined them growing in the emptiness before the face of the sun, tree clinging to tree with tangled roots and interlacing twigs, until at last their accumulation became our Earth, and they only the nap of her garment." Great stuff. Agia returns again, and there's another great battle with one of Hathor's creatures, which Severian sort of survives by making a deal with him. And he actually keeps to the deal. He considers it important to honor the terms of the agreement made with this monstrous Alzabo. And then comes the stuff with Little Severian, which is really sad and brings up an internet theory that I have to look into a little more. And that is the possibility that Severian killed Little Severian. And there's a few things in this text that point to that possibility. But it's so out there that I don't want to get into the details until I have a better grasp of where Wolfe might be going with that. And that part leads to Severian meeting the most evilest character probably in the whole series, which is Typhon. And also another interesting thing about Severian and telling the truth. He told some lies to the magicians to help himself and Little Severian escape. But in the chapter of the Cursed Town, he says he thinks that the lies he told the magician made him less of a man. So he has a sense that lying in any situation may be dishonorable. He gets to Lake Diaturna, which people have speculated is probably Lake Titicaca, and all the stuff with the Hetman's dinner and Pia. And he has more philosophical ponderings and more of his questioning his own sanity, which may play a part in deducing which parts of this story may not have occurred. On page 182, he says, "As I stared into the fire, it seemed more possible than I would have liked to believe that someday, perhaps after a blow on the head, perhaps for no discernible cause, my imagination and my reason might reverse their places, just as two friends who come every day to the same seats in some public garden might at last decide for novelty's sake to exchange them. Then I would see, as if in actuality, all the phantoms of my mind, and only perceive, in that tenuous way in which we behold our fears and ambitions, the people and things of the real world. These thoughts occurring at this point in my narrative must seem prescient. I can only excuse them by saying that, tormented as I am by my memories, I have meditated in the same way very often." So interesting, so interesting. And I remember the first time reading this, as he's getting on the Hetman's boat and being sent to the Archon's castle, wondering, is this dude mad? Is he, coming off shrooms? Actually, technically, he is coming off shrooms at that point from when he was poisoned. And as he's leading this reckless assault on the castle, he's thinking maybe he doesn't want to get rid of the claw. Maybe he was chosen for it. And how could he refuse the Increate when he struck off Catherine's head for the Autarch? That's an interesting line. I don't think he believes that striking off Catherine's head in the ceremony was an actual decapitation, but I think he senses the importance of that ritual. However, there's a lot of discussion and mystery around who exactly Catherine was. Talking about, in this case, not Catherine, his mother, but Catherine with a K, who was there every year somehow in the guild ceremony. He meets the Hierodules in Baldander's tower. He gets along with them great. They bow to him, which Baldanders doesn't like. Severian will be the victor, else why did they kneel to him? Here we see a first look at some of the people behind the scenes. Baldanders says, "These things live only a score of year like dogs." His tone told me more than is written here, for each word fell like a stone dropped down some deep cistern. I said, "That cannot be." And of course, the epic battle against Baldanders, where Terminus Est is destroyed. And it's a reenactment of the fight between the marionettes from Severian's dream in the first book. Book 3 ends with Severian finding the claw broken out from within the shattered gem on the stones of the beach, bringing us to the Citadel of the Autarch. Severian's travels bring him ever closer to the war in the north, and he revives a dead soldier with the claw. But Severian becomes ill and comes into the sort of medical camp of the Pellerines and tries to give the claw back, but they don't believe that it's magical, and they say, go ahead and keep it. And there's an interesting part where he's speaking to the older Pellerine, and she says, I thought the Torturers Guild abolished long ago. Has it become then a species of brotherhood for lictors? It still exists, I told her. No doubt, but some centuries ago it was a true guild like that of the silversmiths. At least so I have read in certain histories preserved by our order. As I heard her, I felt a moment of wild elation. It was not that I supposed her to be somehow correct. I am perhaps mad in certain respects, but I know what those respects are, and such self-deceptions are no part of them. Nevertheless, it seemed wonderful to me, if only for a moment, to exist in a world where such a belief was possible. He says that thought leaves him reeling with giddy joy. What was that about that thought that was so big to Severian? Which, by the way, he says he doesn't believe this idea to be true. But the idea that fills him with joy that someone could think it could exist is that the Torturers could be a true guild like the silversmiths. That tells a lot about what Severian has come to think about the guild, which is not just the guild, it's his whole previous worldview and his previous self. And when he's talking to the younger Pellerine, Ava, there's a funny part where she's talking and he just zones out and has like a conversation in his mind thinking about other stuff. And then he comes back to reality, and she's very nicely just sitting there and waiting for him to come back. And that's also like in the first book when he was talking to Master Palamon, and he zones out and is thinking about something else, and then he comes back to it, and Master Palamon's like, well, you just missed the really good advice I gave you, so good luck. There's a lot of humor in these books. I think that's a really funny part of this character, that from time to time he just like is having a conversation with people, and like I could picture a movie where like first you see the conversation and then you just see him staring there, and it goes to like a voiceover in his head of what he's thinking about, and then back to the person who's saying like, what the frick. Severian's character is dashing and attractive, but he's also quite mad. In the graveyard scene in the beginning, he stumbles upon this fight and just like kills a guy without really much fanfare. He's kind of like a combination of Sir Galahad and Michael Myers. Severian goes on the Master Ash side quest and then decides to sell himself to the Pellerines, and comes back and the camp is destroyed. Most of them are killed. Then he goes on and finds his way into the actual war. I really like the way war is described in this. It's just like this massive movement of troops following orders they're not sure from where, moving against each other in energy weapons that they can't even see, and just sort of like trying not to look like a coward in the middle of massive chaos and destruction. Oh, there's a beautiful red bird. Hang on. What's up, buddy? There's an interview with Gene Wolfe where he talked about his experience in the Korean War as inspiration for how he described combat in this book. Severian meets the Autarch again, realizes he's being groomed for that position. They get shot down, he gets rescued by Agia and the Green Man, eats the Autarch's brain, gets the memories. When it comes to the theme of Severian having the memories of like Thekla through the Alzabo and stuff like that, I think that's a really interesting literary device, which to me strikes me as a metaphor for when we lose people that we care about, we somehow keep them alive inside our own self, so that like sometimes it feels like they're actually with us and seeing the world through our eyes. My favorite scene with Severian and Thekla together in memory was, I think, one of the early ones when it talks about them embracing each other with their hair woven together. As I read this series, I feel like even though I love all 4 books of the series, the first part of the first book, which is his time in the Madigan Tower, is one of the most enduring and beautiful pieces of work I've ever read. And a lot of the rest of the series seems to go back to that. From the conversations he has with Thekla to his experiences with the Guild and with Triskel. The whole series is great, but that section is something special. And it's a tremendous scene when Severian returns with the words of power to the Madigan Tower. Wolfe said that this is a scene that he envisioned early on in the writing of this series. After Palamon recognizes Severian, he's afraid that Severian will dismiss the Masters because they banished him. Severian said he has not yet decided what he's going to do with the Guild. Palamon makes his defense of the Guild, and Severian says it's intolerable that good men should spend a lifetime dispensing pain. And Palamon says it must be done by good men. You are badly advised, Autarch. What is intolerable is that it should be done by bad men. I smiled. His face, as I had seen it then, had recalled something I had thrust from my mind months before. It was that this guild was my family, and all the home I should ever have. I would never find a friend in the world if I could not find friends here. Between us, Master, I told him, we have decided it should not be done at all. That's like kind of the climax of the book, in a way, but Severian has a much bigger adventure ahead of him, such as saving and or destroying Earth in Earth of the New Sun. Earth of the New Sun was partially written to answer a lot of the questions that were left open at the end of the series proper. But there are quite a few questions that are answered, or partially answered, towards the end here. It's such a sad scene when he goes to find Dorcas and sees her there by the bedside of her husband, who's actually old. I'm not sure if he's dead there or just very old and about to die. And Severian doesn't even tell her that he's there. And it's sort of revealed by piecing things together that Dorcas is probably his grandmother, and that the mausoleum where Severian spent his time as a child was in fact built by himself, and the sarcophagus that he used to hang out with was most likely his own grave. And of course that Severian himself was Apu Punchau, as part of the timeline created by the first Severian. One of the best parts of this stuff is that, like, if you hang in there long enough, you get answers to these questions, but then you also get hit with bigger questions. But what's the point of these mysteries when the true story that they're pointing to is ultimately a piece of fiction? What is the meaning of Dr. Talos's play? What's the point of the Book of the New Sun? John Steinbeck has a quote that's something like, the novel is the tale that's told for the sole purpose of companionship. And in the character of Severian, I've definitely found a companion that is probably now a permanent part of my brain. But I think there is a message in the book, which is like from the first time that they started saying the word new sun in the story, I liked it. I liked the image of the coming of a new sun, which is not an original image, but those two words put together in this context sound nice. And I like saying it and I like thinking about it. In Dr. Talos's play and in Earth of the New Sun, it's revealed that in order for that to come, the existing world has to be flooded and destroyed. And I think Gene Wolfe's message here is not necessarily literal, but maybe more that he views the current construction of collective consciousness and institutions as something that will need to be torn down in order for the light of love to reach us. And I do agree with that. Perhaps Severian was chosen to bring the new sun because it needed to be someone who had a full knowledge of the depths of humanity's fall. And I think that torture is probably the worst thing that man has ever created. So for the white fountain, the new sun, to enter into Earth, it had to come through someone who had the full extent of that knowledge, and also had love in his heart, which Severian definitely does. Anyway, I'm not done on this series. I'm just finishing my reread of Earth, and I found a copy of Endangered Species, which is a collection of Gene Wolfe short stories that includes several that are set in the universe of the New Sun. Keep your blade sharpened and oiled, and don't let the brown book get wet. Peace.